In 2008, Clarkson paid £6 million for 1,000 acres of Oxfordshire farmland that was essentially glorified mud. First-year profit, £144. The industry laughed. That same land is now valued at £45 million, and what he constructed on top of it has had British farming executives losing sleep for 3 consecutive years. Because this was never really a farm, it was a masterclass. And by the time you finish reading this, the only question you'll be asking is why nobody else saw it coming. October 2008. The global financial system is in freefall. Banks are going under. Hedge funds are evaporating. Every rational person with serious capital is doing one of two things: liquidating positions as fast as possible, or sitting tight on cash while the carnage plays out. Jeremy Clarkson did neither. While the dust from Lehman Brothers was still settling, he quietly completed a purchase of 1,000 acres of Oxfordshire farmland for £6 million. No announcement, no cameras, no press fanfare. Just a transaction, a set of keys, and a farm manager called Caleb Cooper, who was already working the land and would eventually become, against all reasonable odds, one of the most recognizable faces in British agriculture. The land itself was nothing special by Cotswold standards. Rolling, workable, beautiful in the particular way English farmland tends to be when the light hits it right, but not remarkable. Not the kind of estate that makes agricultural agents wax lyrical. $6 million was a fair valuation, possibly even a touch generous. What Clarkson recognized that the market had missed wasn't agricultural potential, it was structural advantage. Agricultural property relief means that farmland in Britain passes to your heirs entirely free of inheritance tax. Not reduced, free. For someone accumulating serious wealth, that reframes the entire equation. Buy farmland, let it appreciate, and the Treasury receives nothing when you go. He wrote about it openly in the Times, with the straightforward candor of someone who wants you to know this wasn't an accident. He called it the finest investment available to any British subject. He wasn't wrong. The £6 million purchase now sits conservatively at £12.5 million in raw land value alone, before a single venture built on top of it enters the calculation. He doubled his money simply by owning it, not through agricultural brilliance, not through television exposure, through the oldest wealth preservation mechanism in the English playbook, land. But pause for a moment on the timing. In 2008, the prevailing consensus among wealthy individuals was to diversify into financial instruments, hedge funds, equities, structured products. Sophisticated money was flowing toward the city, not toward fields. Clarkson went in precisely the opposite direction, and in doing so, demonstrated something that old money dynasties in this country have understood for generations. Financial markets are fragile and can be manipulated, but an acre of English farmland has never been worth nothing. It has never crashed to zero, never been delisted, dissolved, or frozen by a regulator. It simply sits there, quietly compounding, generation after generation. The aristocracy built entire dynasties on exactly this logic. Clarkson, son of a Paddington Bear toy salesman from Doncaster, arrived at the same conclusion by an entirely different route, which is, in its own way, rather brilliant. But here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, because the land was only ever the foundation. When Amazon Prime commissioned Clarkson's farm, the farming establishment was politely underwhelmed. A television presenter stumbling through harvests, arguing with planning committees, getting things spectacularly wrong for the amusement of people who'd never been within 50 miles of a combine harvester. Fine, mildly entertaining. Probably wouldn't survive past Series 1. What no one in British agriculture had grasped, because they'd never had reason to, was what it actually means to have a television series watched by millions across dozens of countries, every episode of which functions as an advertisement for your farm that costs you nothing to produce and that viewers actively seek out. The farm isn't the business. The farm is the set, and Amazon was picking up the rent. Every equipment failure became content. Every planning refusal became a narrative arc. Every failed harvest, every exchange with Caleb, every moment of theatrical despair, all of it was simultaneously entertainment and marketing. Clarkson had stumbled into, or perhaps deliberately constructed, the most effective agricultural marketing operation in British history. Amazon reportedly pays Clarkson somewhere in the region of £10 to £12 million annually for the Grand Tour alone. Clarkson's farm became Prime Video's most watched UK original. The farm might barely cover its costs agriculturally, but the television series about the farm, that is where the actual financial architecture lives. Every equipment breakdown that costs money on the farming side earns multiples of that figure on the television side. The failure is the product. It is the most counterintuitive commercial model in British broadcasting, and it functions with remarkable consistency. Visitors began arriving, not in modest numbers, but in volumes that required police management of 3-mile tailbacks on country lanes that hadn't seen that kind of disruption since wartime. People drove for hours to buy a jar of something called bees juice, to stand in a field in Oxfordshire and feel, in a way they couldn't quite put into words, connected to something that felt real. That feeling, that sense of authenticity, in a world that had largely abandoned the pretense of it, is worth an enormous amount of money. And Clarkson had it in abundance, precisely because the chaos was genuine. The planning battles were real. The crop failures were real. The 144 pounds profit was gloriously, painfully real. Farming experts observed, with some reluctance, that Clarkson had done more for public awareness of British agriculture in a single series than 3 decades of conventional countryside programming had managed. The British Farming Awards gave him an accolade for championing British agriculture. People with every professional reason to dismiss a television presenter dabbling in their industry, who instead handed him their award because they could see clearly what he'd accomplished. You cannot manufacture that. You can only find it and then point a camera at it. The farm shop started as a shed with some potatoes in it. This is not romanticization. It was literally a shed, some potatoes, a hand-painted sign, and a queue that, within weeks of the first series airing, stretched further than anyone had thought to plan for. The economics of diddly squat farm shop should not work. The produce is priced at a premium. The range is deliberately restricted to what can be sourced within 16 miles, a planning condition imposed by West Oxfordshire District Council that Clarkson's partner Lisa Hogan later admitted was the finest thing that ever happened to the business, because it forced them to discover suppliers they'd never have found otherwise. The opening hours are unpredictable. The parking is inadequate. By every conventional retail measurement, it should have struggled. Within a year, the business had grown from £44,000 in assets to over £1.3 million. That is not a side project becoming profitable. That is a business being born in a field in the rain with a slightly bewildered farm manager watching on. What the shop actually created was something considerably more valuable than revenue. It created pilgrimage. People don't queue for 3 hours to visit an ordinary farm shop. They queue because standing in diddly squat is, for a particular kind of British viewer, an act of participation in a story they've been following on their television. They are not buying honey, they are buying a connection to a narrative they love. And a jar of honey that costs twice the Waitrose price is an entirely reasonable fee for that connection, as the queues prove week after week. The council, meanwhile, kept refusing planning applications. They rejected the car park. They shut down the restaurant with enforcement notices. They turned down application after application, citing the area of outstanding natural beauty and the impact of commercial activity on a rural setting. What they hadn't understood, what only became apparent much later, was that every refusal was an episode. Every enforcement notice was a storyline. Every planning inspector's report became drama that millions watched and that drove more visitors to the very operation the council was attempting to curtail. The council believed they were the regulatory authority. They were, in practice, unpaid co-writers on a television series that was growing more famous with every objection they raised. Clarkson was playing an entirely different game. The council thought they had leverage. They were supplying the narrative. Now, if you've been finding this as compelling as I have, hit subscribe and tap the notification bell. There's considerably more of this to come, and you won't want to miss where it goes. And if you've ever queued at diddly squat yourself, drop it in the comments. We genuinely love hearing what you made of it. In Series 2, Clarkson grew some barley and decided to make beer. The brewing industry was not alarmed. Celebrity alcohol brands follow a predictable template. Famous person licenses their name to an existing drinks company. That company does the actual work. Celebrity shows up at launches, collects a percentage, and moves on. It is a licensing arrangement wearing the costume of entrepreneurship, and the drinks industry knows precisely how to handle it. Acquire the brand once it reaches sufficient scale, fold it into existing distribution, extract the value. Hawkstone Lager did not follow that template. Clarkson actually built a brewery. With actual equipment, actual brewers, actual supply chains. The barley comes from his farm and neighboring operations within a few miles, not from wherever happens to be cheapest that quarter. From Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire, from farmers who now have a guaranteed buyer at a fair price rather than the indifferent mercy of commodity markets. By 2025, Hawkstone had posted sales exceeding £2 million, nearly tripling year-on-year, 134% annual growth, ranking it as the 23rd fastest-growing private company in Britain, stocked in Waitrose, Sainsbury's, Morrisons, and over 2,000 pubs nationwide. An advertising campaign in which farmers delivered a rather emphatic endorsement of the product was promptly banned by the Advertising Standards Authority. It was subsequently watched by over 1 million people online. The ban was, by most assessments, the finest marketing the brand could have hoped for. One suspects Clarkson understood this when he approved it. The brewery now employs 53 people. It has expanded 3 times in 4 years. Its valuation has reached £75 million, entirely separate from the farm's own £45 million valuation. 2 distinct businesses, each feeding the other, each making the other more valuable. The farm grows the barley. The brewery makes the beer. The television show advertises both. The farm shop sells both. Every element of the enterprise reinforces every other. But here is the detail that separates Hawkstone from every other celebrity drinks brand. You cannot acquire the brand without acquiring the model. Carlsberg reportedly made a private approach with a £50 million acquisition offer. Clarkson declined within 24 hours, because without the local sourcing, without the transparent production, without the Oxfordshire barley and the Cotswolds farmers, Hawkstone is just another lager. The business model is the brand. They are inseparable. You cannot extract one without destroying the other. The major breweries grasped this. Eventually, and rather uncomfortably, they were not dealing with a licensing arrangement. They were dealing with a vertically integrated agricultural enterprise that had turned provenance into competitive advantage and that operated in a space where their scale was a liability rather than an asset. The farmer's dog came next, a pub committed entirely to British produce, including black pepper from Cornwall at 10 times the cost of the imported alternative, British beef rather than cheaper substitutes, and a wine list that caused the accountants considerable distress. Clarkson described it, without visible embarrassment, as a brilliant way of turning £100 into £94. It employs 146 people. It loses money on food, with something approaching aristocratic indifference to the arithmetic, and recovers that loss entirely on Hawkstone lager, on which it retains the full margin. What looks like eccentricity, examined carefully, reveals itself as something rather more deliberate. The pub exists to showcase British farming, to provide filming locations for future series, and to sell Hawkstone at full margin to customers who arrive for the beef and leave having bought the beer. It is a loss leader with a business plan, and the business plan is rather good. The British-only sourcing policy deserves a moment's attention, because it is either the most commercially reckless decision in the history of British hospitality or the most strategically astute. The answer depends entirely on what you believe the pub is actually for. No Heinz ketchup, no Coca-Cola, nothing sourced from beyond these islands. Every dish tells a story about a British farmer, a British field, a British season. The menu shifts, not because a marketing team has decided it should, but because British seasons change and British produce follows them. This makes the kitchen slower, more expensive, and considerably more difficult to operate than any conventional pub. It also makes it unlike any other pub in Britain, which is precisely the point. People do not queue to visit ordinary pubs. They queue to visit the pub that is making a stand, even when, perhaps especially when, making that stand is costing its owner money. Then there is the Grand Tour tent, Clarkson's famous traveling marquee from his Amazon motoring series, now installed permanently on the grounds of the farmer's dog, repurposed as retail and dining space housing Hops and Chops, a butcher, and the farmer's puppy, an outdoor kitchen. On paper, a piece of television history converted into a trading operation. In practice, it means that visitors who can't secure a table inside the pub can still spend money outside it, browsing in a space that carries its own cultural weight. Every square foot is earning. Every visitor is a potential customer, regardless of whether a reservation was ever made. Then there is Caleb Cooper, the farm manager who was already at Diddley Squat when Clarkson bought the place, now has assets reportedly approaching 7 figures. He moved from modest agricultural wages to becoming a touring performer with his own show, The World According to Caleb, and a public profile that rivals established television presenters. His merchandise sells. His appearances sell out. His name on a product carries genuine commercial weight. He is, by any measure, one of the most unlikely success stories British farming has generated in living memory. What makes Caleb's trajectory genuinely interesting, beyond the personal good fortune of it, is what it reveals about the Clarkson model. Clarkson was perceptive enough to recognize early that without Caleb, there is no show. Not because Caleb was manufactured, cast, or auditioned, but because he was already there, already real, already expert, already possessed of the good-humored stubbornness and cheerful refusal to be impressed by celebrity that makes their dynamic work so reliably. The banter isn't scripted, the knowledge is genuine, the mutual exasperation is entirely authentic, and audiences, who are considerably more discerning than the television industry sometimes assumes, can sense the difference between real and performed from the opening frame. Clarkson's actual skill here, as in everything, was recognizing that the authentic thing was already standing in front of him and resisting every temptation to improve it. He didn't attempt to make Caleb more telegenic, more articulate, or more conventionally appealing to a mainstream audience. He simply pointed the camera at what was already there and trusted viewers to respond. They responded by making Caleb a household name. This is the Clarkson model in miniature, and it applies equally to the farm, the shop, the brewery, and the pub. Find the authentic thing. Resist the urge to polish it. Trust the audience. See what happens. The planning battles continued around all of it. The temporary permissions for the farm shop, restaurant, and visitor facilities carry an expiry that creates perpetual uncertainty and perpetual content. The council believes it holds leverage. What it actually holds is a recurring role in a television series watched around the world. And the brewery, which is the actual business, the engine running beneath all the visible activity, operates on entirely separate land under entirely separate planning permission, generating revenue that has no dependence whatsoever on whether West Oxfordshire District Council approves a car park, a restaurant extension, or a marquee. The farm shop was always the marketing department. The brewery is the company, and the company is doing rather well. Return to 2008. The £6 million, the 1,000 acres, the friends who thought he'd taken leave of his senses. What none of them could see, what nobody could see, because it hadn't happened yet, was that the farm was never a farm. It was a platform, a foundation for an enterprise spanning television, brewing, retail, hospitality, and property. Every element feeding back into the others, each piece making the rest more valuable. The television show made the farm shop viable. The farm shop built the brand. The brand launched the brewery. The brewery funded the pub. The pub generated more content. The content brought more visitors. The visitors bought more beer. It is not a farm. It is a flywheel. And the 144-pound first-year profit, that catastrophic, hilarious, magnificent failure, was the moment the flywheel began to turn. Consider what Clarkson has actually built, measured not in revenue, but in impact. Hundreds of jobs in rural communities that were quietly losing them. A brewery that created a guaranteed market for British barley farmers who previously had no choice but to accept whatever commodity markets would offer. A farm shop that demonstrated more persuasively than any government rural strategy paper that people will drive an unreasonable distance to buy something they genuinely believe in. A television series that made millions of urban viewers think seriously, perhaps for the first time, about where their food actually comes from and what it genuinely costs to produce. He was dismissed by the BBC over an incident involving a cold steak and a producer. By any reasonable measure, it was an act of catastrophic professional self-destruction. And in the space that disaster cleared, he built something worth £45 million in land alone, alongside a brewery valued at £75 million, a farm shop turning over more than £1 million annually, and a pub employing 146 people in a corner of Oxfordshire where employment isn't always straightforward to find. The BBC executives who declined to renew his contract are presumably still working through the arithmetic of that decision. What Clarkson has demonstrated, in mud, in chaos, and in 144 pounds of first-year profit, is something the English countryside has always understood and the cities keep forgetting. That land endures. That honesty sells. That a well-told story is worth more than any advertising budget. And that the finest investments are frequently the ones that look, at first glance, completely unhinged. The farm that nobody thought would survive is now the proof of concept that an entire agricultural sector, a brewing industry, and a retail industry are all trying to make sense of simultaneously. And somewhere in Oxfordshire, a man in a wax jacket is probably arguing with something that's broken in an interesting way while a camera rolls. There is a line Clarkson wrote in the Times that has stayed with me. He said that land is a better investment than anything a bank can offer, that the government takes nothing when you die, and that the price of food can only travel in one direction. He was correct on every count. But what he didn't write, and perhaps hadn't yet worked out, was that the land would become the stage for something that couldn't have been planned, only stumbled into, with sufficient stubbornness and sufficient camera time and sufficient unpolished, genuine chaos to make the whole country stop and pay attention. That is the real story of Clarkson's Farm, not the investment thesis, not the brewery, not even the shop with the impossible queues. The real story is that a man bought a field, made every conceivable mistake in it, refused to be embarrassed by any of them, and in doing so, reminded an entire nation why the English countryside still matters. If you've enjoyed today's story, do subscribe and tap the notification bell, and have a look at the video on your screen right now. We think you'll find it equally rewarding. Drop us a comment below. We'd genuinely love to know, did you visit Diddley Squat? And if you did, was the honey worth the queue? Thank you as always for watching.